Okay, welcome everyone to Tellabration. This is a joint Tellabration sponsored by the Storytelling Association of California, and we have the Sacramento Storytellers Guild connected with the Inland Valley Storytellers. And we will have 4 tellers from each group and an MC from each group to introduce their tellers. And we'll be alternating the telling event here. And our first presenter for information is Nick Smith. And Nick is a teller of historical tales for adult audiences. He tells traditional tales for all ages, and he puts on shows, runs festivals, performed at unusual venues ranging from Victorian houses to courthouses, even in the mausoleum, along with the more traditional venues of festivals, concerts, libraries, museums, and schools. So he was, for many years, the leader of the San Gabriel Valley Storytellers in LA County, and he became an active member of the Inland Valley Storytellers in 2004. And with his many years of experience organizing events, he helped this group grow and prosper. He's been a teller at many concerts since Tellabration 2004, and Nick is the MC for the Inland Valley Storytellers. So please take it away, Nick. He's going to be reading our proclamation.
Yes, because this is a very important part of Tellabration. In the name of storytelling, Sunday, November 20th, 2022 is hereby proclaimed to be part of Tellabration Weekend, the worldwide event of storytelling on this weekend in 40 states and 8 countries, from San Diego to San Antonio, Boise to Barcelona, West Virginia to West Indies, and especially from Sacramento to Claremont. Over 300 audiences are gathered for this spectacular storytelling event this weekend. Without further delay, enjoy and anticipation, let the stories begin. Now, from the Inland Valley Group, John St. Clair made his first public storytelling performance in 2003 at the first Inland Valley Storytellers Tellabration concert, which was held at the Claremont Forum. John has performed at every IVS Tellabration concert since then, as well as every IVS Spring concert since 2005. He has represented the Inland Valley Storytellers at the annual Southern California Story Swap Festival since 2005. He's served as the leader, treasurer, and webmaster for the Inland Valley Storytellers since 2007, because frankly, he's the organized guy in the group. He's a retired school teacher and a teller of largely folk tales and interesting other stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, John Sinclair.
Today, I'm going to tell you a folk tale from Serbia. Long ago, there was a queen in child labor about to deliver a new baby. She was in the royal bedchambers with a midwife. Out in the hallway, the king was pacing back and forth, and finally the door opened and the midwife stuck her head out and said, "Your Majesty, it's a baby boy," but the king didn't wait to hear what else she had to say. He rushed into the room. His wife, the queen, was holding the baby and smiling and saying, "He's a beautiful baby boy," but the king didn't wait to hear what else she had to say. He took the baby from the queen, held it up high and smiled and said, "What a beautiful, healthy looking baby boy." Now the baby was all wrapped up in blankets, and the king was curious as to whether he had any hair, because some babies do and some babies don't. So he removed the blankets from the baby's head and he was shocked. And the midwife said, "Now, Your Majesty, don't worry. Sometimes things like this happen. He may grow out of it." Well, what the midwife was talking about that the baby might grow out of were 2 very large ears on the baby, kind of like donkey ears sticking straight up. The king said, "This is horrible. This can't be. People will make fun of him. They'll laugh at him. How can he ever have respect when it's time for him to become the new king and take my place. We've got to do something. So the king and queen plotted out a plan. They gave the midwife a bag of gold, and they had her escorted to a faraway kingdom where she could live comfortably for the rest of her life and keep the secret. Now, to make sure no one else found out about the baby having these donkey ears, the king and queen decided that no one would care for this baby except the queen. So the queen did the breastfeeding, did the washing, the bathing, the dressing, all these things that are usually not done by a queen, but delegated to someone else to do. But they wanted to keep the secret, and this was the only way they could think of to actually ensure that nobody knew about the ears. And it all worked very well. And as the baby grew into a young boy, she didn't have to care for him as much, but she did have to cut his hair because they didn't want the royal barber to see. So they had a special crown fitted that would hide the boy's ears. So when the prince was seen in the public, no one could tell that he had these huge ears. And unfortunately, the midwife was wrong. He didn't outgrow them. As he grew, so did his ears. And so they had to keep fitting him with larger and larger crowns to hide the ears. And it all worked quite well. And he grew up to be a fine young man. He was handsome, he was strong, he was intelligent, and certainly fit to be the next king. Well, when the king and queen died, he took over as king, and all went very well except for one thing. His hair kept growing, and his mother was no longer around to cut his hair. So the king finally decided that people would start talking about his long hair if he didn't get a haircut. So he called the royal barber into a private room, and he took off his crown, and the ears popped out, and the barber was surprised, but he didn't say anything. And he cut the king's hair. And when he finished, the king said, "Now, do you notice anything unusual about me?" And the barber said, "Well, I couldn't help but notice, Your Majesty, that you have the ears of a donkey." The king picked up his sword and chopped off the man's head. He quickly called for guards to take the body and the head out in the forest to be buried. Well, this happened again. About 4 or 5 months later, the king needed to have his hair cut again. They had found a new royal barber who was cutting everybody else's hair in the royal court. And when the king ordered him in to cut his hair, the same thing happened again. And this kept happening until there was only one barber left in the whole kingdom. And this was an old barber way far away from the palace in that far out reaches of the kingdom. And on the day this barber was summoned to go to the palace to cut the king's hair, he was sick. The old man was sick. Now, he had a 13-year-old apprentice, a young boy, who he had been training. And so he told the boy, "You go cut the king's hair." And the boy said, "Am I ready to cut the king's hair?" And the old man said, yes, you've learned very well. You'll do a fine job. Just take your barber tools and go do it. So the boy did, and he took off for the castle. It was an all-day's journey. And when he got there, he told them he had come to cut the king's hair, and the guards looked kind of sad because they had seen many barbers enter the palace. They had never seen one leave. And so the boy was admitted in, given a place to spend the night. And the next day, he reported to the king and said, "Your Majesty, I'm here to cut your hair." "What? A boy? Are you capable of cutting a king's hair?" And the boy said, "Yes, I'm well trained. My master barber said I could do it." And so the king took him into the private room, took off his crown. And when the king's ears popped out, the boy smiled because it reminded him of an old folktale he had heard about warriors who, every time they'd do a brave act like slaying a dragon or rescuing a damsel, their ears would grow a little bit. So he thought it was kind of cool. And he cut the king's hair, and he did fine. And the king said, "Now, do you notice anything unusual about me?" And the boy said, "No, Your Majesty, I think you look great with your haircut." And the king smiled and said, "That was the right answer. Now, if you can keep our little secret, you can keep your head." But if you ever tell anybody about my ears, you're going to lose your head. And so the boy said, no problem. Have you ever tried to keep a secret that you couldn't tell anybody in the world? It's not easy. And it took a toll on the boy, which was so sad. The king grew to like him because sometimes the king would actually talk about problems he was having in the kingdom and ask the boy's advice. And the boy was very truthful and thoughtful. And the king really liked this boy and felt he could trust him. And the boy wanted to, deserve the king's trust. So he kept the secret, but he began to get sick. When you hold something in like that, it eats away. And finally, he was bedridden. And his friend, his mentor barber, made the trip to the castle to visit him and ask him what was wrong. And the boy said, I have a secret I can't tell anyone. And the old barber said, well, you can tell me. You can trust me. I can keep the secret. Oh, no, said the boy. If I tell you, we'll both lose our heads. Well, nope, said the old barber. That's okay. Don't tell me. But you could tell the priest. No, said the boy. Can't tell anyone. And then the old barber thought, when I was a boy, my mother told me if I had a secret that I couldn't tell anyone and it was bothering me, I should dig a hole in the ground and tell the secret to the earth and then cover it up. And the boy thought, well, that might work. I'm willing to try anything. In fact, just the idea that he might have a way of dealing with this made him feel better, made him feel good enough that the next day he got out of bed, got a shovel, early in the morning, went out into the forest, dug a hole, and got down on his hands and knees and said into the hole, the king has the ears of a donkey. And then he covered it up. It was magical. Suddenly he felt like a great weight had been lifted off of his shoulders. He felt better already. And he got back to the castle in half the time it took him to get out there to dig the hole. Well, the magic that he felt continued after he left, but it happened in the ground because that night a willow tree grew out of that hole where he had told the secret. And it grew all night long until it was a full-grown willow tree. And the next morning, some children went out into the forest and they were hunting for willow branches to cut and whittle into a penny whistle. And they saw this willow tree and they cut some of the branches that were the right size and made them into little penny whistles, took them back into the city where the palace was and sold them. The only thing is that when you blew on these penny whistles, it didn't play a little tune. It sang a song. The king has the ears of a donkey. The king has the ears of a donkey. The king has the ears. The king has the ears. The king has the ears of the donkey. Well, the king was sitting at his window and these songs were coming up through his window and he was hearing this and he was furious. He told the guards to go get the barber and he had the barber brought to him. He said, how could you do this to me? I trusted you. You broke my trust. How could you betray me like this? And the poor boy said, Your Majesty, I didn't tell anyone. I swear I told no one. What I did is I dug a hole in the forest floor and I whispered the secret about your ears into the ground and covered it up. And that made me feel better because it was too much stress for me to keep this secret without telling something. And I thought it was safe to tell it into the ground. The king said, show me. And so the boy took the king into the forest where he had dug the hole. And when they got there, the boy said, whoa, what is this? There wasn't a tree there yesterday. It was barren ground. That's why it chose that spot to dig the hole. There was nothing anywhere around. And the king said, let me see. He took out a knife. He cut off a little branch of the willow tree. He whittled it into a little penny whistle and he blew on it. And he heard, the king has the ears of a donkey. The king has the ears of a donkey. The king has the ears. The king has the ears. The king has the ears of a donkey. And the king thought, And he thought not just with his brain, he thought with his heart. He really believed the boy did not betray him. And he could see that the stress that he had put on the boy to keep this secret was not really fair to this boy. And he thought maybe it was time for him to stop living the lie. And so he took off the crown and he let his ears come out, and he and the boy walked back to the castle side by side. Going through the city, people were staring at this king with these donkey ears, and some of them were smiling, some of them were giggling, some of them were saying things under their breath that they didn't want the king to hear. But it didn't really affect his ability to rule that kingdom. He still had their respect. In fact, he had taught them a very important lesson, that what's important is the character of the person, not their outward appearance. And the king continued to rule justly as he had before, although he did pay some restitutions to the widows of the barbers whose lives he had ended. But other than that, he had always been a good and just king. And he didn't have any children. And so as he grew older and knew his life would be coming to an end, he made sure everyone knew that he wanted this boy to become the next king, because he had made this boy not only the royal barber, but he had made him his chief advisor, because he really respected the boy's truthfulness and thoughtfulness. And he felt that he would make a good king. And so when the king died, indeed, the barber became the new king. And he ruled justly and wisely. And because the king had taught everybody the important lesson about judging people by their character, not by their outward appearance, everybody lived happily ever after. The king's ears. Thank you.
Ah, hey, thank you so much for that. I've heard a story like that, an African tale. So that is a folk tale that's been told in different formats.
Yeah, that one I got it attributed it to Serbia.
Oh, wow.
It was in one of Dan Ketting's books where he collects tales from Eastern Europe.
Oh, boy. I love hearing Dan Ketting. I haven't heard him for a while, but yeah, thanks for doing that. Appreciate that. And I was intrigued right from the beginning about, what they're going to do with these donkey ears. And then that idea of keeping a secret. And once the secret came out, you start thinking about, oh, okay, secrets. What secrets have I kept? I'm going to think about that a little more. Thank you so much for a well-told story and a great way to start our event. Okay, so our next storyteller is Linda Kennedy from the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. And Linda is an old friend. She has performed as a regional teller up at the queen of festivals, the Sierra Storytelling Festival. And for 11 years, she was the MC of the open mic up there and helped discover a lot of really great storytellers. She had a tandem group that I just heard at a potluck she put on at her house. And we had about 15 storytellers and listeners there, and it was a wonderful event. Now, Linda also has told stories with a volunteer with the Women's Empowerment Program of Sacramento, where she used stories to encourage the previously homeless women to discover their own journey through story and to be in charge of their very own next chapter in their lives. So Linda's done a lot of important work in the storytelling field, and we are very pleased to have her as part of our Sacramento Storytellers Guild. Thank you so much, and welcome, Linda.
Thank you. This is a few weeks early, but this is what I wanted to tell today. Over the river and through the woods, to grandfather's house we go. Now, when Tom and I woke up that Christmas Eve morning and saw there was another foot of fresh fallen snow, we knew it was going to be a marvelous Christmas when the family arrived. Oh, the fun we were going to have. The first to arrive that day was our son Patrick and his wife Susan. And as Patrick carried in their things and put gifts under the tree, Susan brought in a tower of Tupperware full of all of her wonderful home baked goodies. She went into the kitchen and took things out of that Tupperware and filled Christmas platters of all of her wonderful little things, from fudge to candies and breads and everybody's favorite little jam tarts. Not long after that, our daughter Jancy and her family arrived. The grandchildren, Ethan and Katie, they rushed in and quickly gave us hugs because they couldn't wait to get back outside and start building their very first snowman. Jancy walked in holding 2 home-baked pumpkin pies, but when she got to the kitchen and saw all those platters of Susan's treats, she said, "Where am I going to put these?" Well, the refrigerator was already full of all the ingredients of our traditional menu. And so she said, "I don't have any place for these, Mom." And I said, "You know, Jan, with that snow outside, I bet you anything the garage is colder than the refrigerator. Take them out there, but put them up high enough so that Chelsea, our lab, doesn't help herself to an early Christmas dessert." And so it was. She went outside. She came back in and she said, "Mission accomplished." Well, the rest of the day was just as we had planned. There was a village of snow people built in the front yard. We got the sled and snow saucer down off the wall in the breezeway, and they carved out a trail down behind the house, sledding and having so much fun. Of course, there were the snowball fights, intermittent breaks for hot chocolate. In the evening, we all gathered around the dining room table. We enjoyed our favorite recipes of our traditional meals we'd done for so many Christmases. We lit the candles that had been on our table since Tom and I got married in 1962. It was a wonderful evening. But by and by, we had to tell the grandchildren, "Santa won't come unless you go to sleep." And so one by one, eventually, the family found their way up the stairs for their long winter's nap. Leaving Tom and I downstairs to turn off the Christmas lights, blow out candles, bank the coals in the fireplace. It was the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, except for my spouse. He said, "Linda, did you remember to put the batteries in Ethan's toy before you wrapped it?" I hadn't. I'd forgotten all about it. He said, "Okay." He said, "I'll go look for the batteries. And when we find them, we'll just put them in his stocking. And when he opens his gift, we'll help him assemble it. That will be great." Well, we looked high and low. We could not find that little Toys R Us bag that had the batteries in it. Before I knew it, Tom had his coat on. I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I'm going to go to town to buy batteries." I said, "Look, it's after midnight. Nothing is open. We don't even know if the road has been plowed. It's 6 miles to town." And he said, "I won't be able to sleep unless I know I tried." So I said, "Be safe." Well, about an hour later, Tom got back. He came in saying, "Good news, bad news." And I said, "Well, what happened?" And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out a little bag and he said, "The batteries, the AM Market at the gas station had the batteries." And I said, "That's great. So what's the bad news?" He said, "Well, when I left, I did not put the garage door down. And when I pulled in, I remembered you girls talking earlier about the pies going out in the garage, and I've looked for them. They're gone. I think a raccoon came and got them." And I said, wait, Tom, are you telling me that you did not take the pies down off the top of the car before you left? And his answer was, "And so it was." He turned around and started for the door. And I said, "Now where are you going?" He said, "Well, I'm going to go search for those pies." That is when I grabbed my coat. I said, I would not miss this for anything. So it was. We bundled up, got in the car, and we drove that 6 winding miles down the highway to Highway 49 down below, looking for those pies, and they were not to be found. We get to the bottom near Nevada City, and I said, "Tom, this is a good place to turn around. It's time to go home." He goes, "No, we're going to go buy new pies." I said, "But it's 1 o'clock in the morning. There is nothing open." And he says, I won't be able to sleep unless I know I tried. And I said, okay, let's go on to Grass Valley where there's supermarkets. Well, we're going down 49, and then we see off to the left in bright neon, the store, Lucky Store. It says it's open 24 hours. We drive over there. There's no cars in the parking lot. We look inside. There's nobody there. I said, let's go home. But he says, no, look right across the street. Bright neon lights again. It says Bumbleberry Cafe, fresh pies, open 24 hours. We drive over there so excited this will be it. And we get there. The lights are on the door is a big sign, closed for the holidays. I said, okay, let's get on the highway. Let's go home. He goes, no, look, across the street on the other side of the freeway. He sees Denny's Diner, bright neon lights, open 24 hours. I said, you know, they're closed. Well, I won't be able to sleep. And I said, okay, let's go. Well, we get over there, and lo and behold, I tell you, there are cars in the parking lot. Denny's Diner, a haven on Christmas Eve, early Christmas morning, a place for people to go where there is no other place to be. We can see through those beautifully painted Christmas windows of snowmen and Christmas trees. We can see people sitting in their booths, most of them alone. We can see the waitresses with cheerful faces refilling coffee pots, coffee cups. And Tom says, I'll go in. He was gone a few minutes and he comes out with a bag. I said, well, what happened? He said, I went in and I said, do you have pies? And they said, well, did you place an order? And he said, well, no, because, and they said, well, all we have are frozen pies. But if you want them for your Christmas meal later this afternoon, this evening, they'll be ready. He said, great, I'll take two pumpkin pies. And then he took that bag and he sat it on my lap and he backed out and we drove home. Now, going back up that winding 6 miles, we didn't talk to each other very much. We were probably both thinking about what could have happened to those pumpkin pies that Jancy had put on top of the car. Do you remember these words? He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot. His clothes were all covered with ashes and soot, and a bundle of toys he'd flung on his back. He looked just like a peddler opening his sack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. And his droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stem of a pipe he clenched tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a round little belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly, short and stout, a right jolly old elf. And I laughed when I saw him in spite of, oh my gosh, I laughed when I saw him get out of the car and carefully take those precious pumpkin pies out of those Denny's boxes and put them up on top of the car. Oh, you know, I saw Santa 3 times that night. The first Santa I saw was a devoted grandfather in search of batteries. The second Santa I saw was a loving father in search of those pies. And then the other Santa I saw looked just like my husband, who took my hand in his and he whispered, shh, let's go in quietly so we don't wake everybody up, for they might think that Santa is here. Over the river and through the woods, it's grandfather's cap I spy. Hooray for the fun, is the pudding done? Hooray for the pumpkin pies.
Linda, that was great.
Thank you.
It's always so much fun to hear a true Christmas tale that people have lived through. And I'm sure we've all lived through something at Christmas that's worthy of putting into a tale, but that one was just a delight. Well, we move down on our agenda here and having our next teller ready. Our next teller is Adrienne Lowry. She's been telling with the Inland Valley Storytellers for over a decade, but she's been telling stories before that because she first got into that role when she had to tell stories while still working on her graduate degree. And I know that she's been attending storytelling events for probably 20 years and doing things of storytelling variety here and there. And I know that she also helps people craft stories in her academic and editorial work. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us turn to our next teller, Adrienne Lowry.
You're on mute, Adrienne.
Okay. When the picture gets big, the mute button disappears out of the corner and you have to find it elsewhere. Well, my friend Elaine was known in her community as quite the generous knitter. You see, she had been knitting her whole life, and most of everything she'd ever made, she'd given away. And she began to teach other people how to knit too. I mean, she got women together at church. Well, there were a couple of men who joined too, to make scarves for breast cancer patients at the local cancer center. And they also made little caps for preemie babies to keep their little heads warm. And she even taught classes in knitting and began the shawl ministry at her church, where they make shawls for those who are grieving the loss of a loved one. But pretty much everything she made, she gave away. And people would ask her, Elaine, when are you going to knit something for yourself? Just, oh, I will when I find the right yarn. And so she continued and, made gloves for the secretaries at the church when the air conditioning was a little too strong during the summer. And she also made scarves and knitted ties for the pastors and some of her friends. And so she, again, they would ask her, when are you going to make something for yourself? And she said, I will, as soon as I find the right yarn. And they said, oh, sure, you're never going to make anything. She says, no, I'm looking for a yarn that's just the right shade of blue. I'm looking for something that will just, I'll know it when I see it. Well, it happened that summer, she was contacted by her friend Janine and told her, I want you to come visit me. Well, Janine lived all the way out on the West Coast, and Elaine lived all the way on the East Coast. But they figured, hey, she and her family figured this would be a great time for a summer trip cross country, and we'll camp along the way and just have a wonderful time. And so they packed the car and got the kids all in there, left the dog with a friend, decided that was not the right one to add to the car trip. And off they started. And she just couldn't help but think, I really would like to make something for myself. She had given it a little more thought. And as they traveled across the country, and she saw the, flowers on the side of the road, and she thought, I would like to find some yarn that is as blue, as deep as the mountain lake in front of Grandpa's cabin where I spent my summers, or as rich as the blueberries that she and her sister picked every spring, which Mom made into jams and jellies and pies, and as sparkling as the tooth fairy costume her mom helped her make when she first learned to sew. And so they continued to sort of travel across, and just had a great time stopping and camping. And she would look out the window and saw these beautiful cornflowers. Yes, I want something, a blue that's as pretty as those cornflowers, like the ones my sister and I picked along the side of the garden, and as bright as the tie-dyed t-shirts that I made with my Girl Scout troop in summer camp for Color Day, and as precious as the beaded necklace that my pen pal sent me one summer. Well, as they continued, they stopped at little towns along the way, and what do you know? She found a yarn shop right next to a yogurt shop. Well, for her, going and petting the yarn was just about as delicious as the kids draw towards the frozen yogurt. So they each went towards their treats. She said she'd catch up with them. And as she went into the yarn shop, she loved just sort of feeling all the pretty colors and the different fibers and everything. And those of you who are knitters, you understand. Sometimes you just have to pet the yarn. And she got to the back of the shop and saw the clearance baskets. And there she saw it. Sitting on top was this little blue fuzzy ball. Had a little silken sheen to it, a little bit of a alpaca halo to it. So pretty. And she thought, I couldn't be lucky enough to find all that I need for the shawl. And she dug through and found another one. And then found another one and dug through another basket and found another. And pretty soon she had 6 balls of this precious silken yarn with the soft angora, soft alpaca sheen to it. Well, she never ended up getting over to the yogurt shop next door, and her husband knew she wouldn't, so he came out with her yogurt cone, and knowing she'd already found her treat, but they saved her one. And so she sat in the car as they drove across the country, scenery going by as a blur out the window, seen through a haze of alpaca yarn made with silk and merino wool. And she couldn't help but think, oh, it's just soft as the onesie she dressed her firstborn boy in when she brought him home from the hospital. And as smart as the first car she bought with her own money, a little Datsun B210 tin can. And as floral as the Delft pottery she brought home from Holland on the first time she traveled outside the country and when she was in college. And on she went. They went across the country, camped along the way, scenery going by. She knitted happily along, and they got to a beautiful swimming hole. And the kids, of course, were calling, come on, Mom, come swim. And she was happy sitting in the shade. And the shawl grew and grew in her lap, blue and dimensional, as dark as the center of the pond where her kids plunged from the tree swing, and as flashing as the trout that swam by in the deeper shaded pools, and expansive as the wide Montana sky they drove through as they headed their way west. Well, soon enough, they ended up in Seattle, where Janine lived. And she was just biting off that last row and tucking in the ends as they drove up to Janine's house. And she noticed all the balloons and the streamers and things. And she looked at her husband and said, don't you remember? It's Janine's big 5-0. That's right. She had completely forgotten. She was so excited to see Janine, she had forgotten that the birthday was part of the package. Well, they got out of the car and she took the shawl and folded it neatly. And as they walked up the walkway, Janine was so excited to see Elaine, and they hugged, and Elaine gave her this folded silken lace bundle. She said, I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to wrap it for you. And Janine unfurled it. It's so beautiful. Oh my goodness. It's so shiny and soft. And she put it around her shoulders. She said, oh, I love it. It's as rich as those taffeta gowns that we wore for prom, and and it's as bright as that blue bikini that we each had that summer when we lifeguarded at the lake, and it's just as deep and beautiful as your eyes on the day you first called me your friend. Thank you so much. Well, Elaine watched Janine as she circled through the party the rest of the evening, and her husband came up behind her and put his arms around her and gave her a little hug, and she sort of blinked back tears that sort of had formed on her eyelashes, and he says, "Oh, you worked so hard on that." She said, "That's okay. It's okay." Because you see, Elaine knew what every knitter knows, that it's not really love until you give it away. And that's my story, Blue Like Love.
Wow. Woo, what a touching story. You bring up so many emotions when I listen to your stories. I've had the pleasure of listening to Adrian at our genre storytelling events with the Storytelling Association of California. And I really am impressed by the way you describe things and just
Thank you.
bring everything to life. Thank you so much. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, so our next storyteller is from the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. He's a good friend of mine. His name's Dave Tarvin, and he has been a counselor. She was a counselor for many years in his career and worked with children all over California and Hawaii. And he's had the opportunity to be the artistic director of a thing called the Story Train, which is a performing arts organization providing storytelling performances, creative storytelling groups, and storytelling workshops for seniors in Placer County, Nevada County, and Yuba County. And one other thing I know about Dave, because I've just joined him out on a little trip, is that he is a fantastic artist, and he's doing what's called plein air art, where you set up an easel and you paint the environment. I got to go out and sit with him for a while out in the beautiful countryside, and he's quite the artist, and you're in for a real treat. He might tell a tall tale or two. You just quite never know, but it's going to be good, whatever it is. So please welcome Dave Tarvin.
Well, hello, everybody. My pleasure to be here today. And I do indeed have a story. See, I'm really excited today. I mean, I'm really excited. I just finished earlier today packing my car for my annual trip up into the high Sierras up by Lake Tahoe. I go each and every winter, and I look forward to it every year. And it all started about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, my wife and I, we went up to Tahoe for, one of those weekends. She wanted to get away, had to get away, and I was trying to be the good husband. And so we went up to Lake Tahoe, and so we were up there for a couple of days, but I wanted to get out. I wanted to go do something, And so I told her, let's go snowshoeing. And so I went down and I rented some snowshoes, and we went out to this trailhead, like a cross-country skiing trailhead, and we started down the trail. And she was pretty happy as we started out. But we were about a mile out, and all of a sudden, you could hear all this racket behind us. And I turned around and looked, and here was this group of young people coming up on us very, very quickly. I mean, these were experienced skiers. You could just tell by the way that they moved. And so when I saw them coming, I just stepped off the trail. I grabbed my wife, I pulled her to me, and these people just came flying by. And they were all yakking. There was music playing, and I'm not sure who they were. Maybe they were just regular skiers. Maybe they were some of those X Game people, or maybe they were Olympians, because I know that the Olympic ski team often works out up there. But whoever they were gone pretty quick. My wife she was turned off by the whole experience and she wanted to go back and I didn't. So I said, here's the car keys, come pick me up in a couple of hours. And so she headed back and I kept heading forward. Well, I had gone probably about 3 miles and I was on the trail and it was pretty steep right there. You know, it was really hugged up against the mountain and it was really, really steep. And all of a sudden, I heard all that noise again. And before you know it, this crowd of people comes flying around the corner and I'm right there. And so I tried to jump out of the way because of this whole group of people. And somehow my feet got kind of tangled up in those big old snowshoes. Well, I fell right off the side of the mountain. And I started sliding down and I was like eating snow. So I bent my body like this and I became a human sled. And I was just shooting down the side of the mountain. Well, I don't know what you know about sleds or tobogganing. I don't know very much, but I know this, that they tend to go faster and faster as you are going downhill. And pretty soon, I don't have no idea where I was. And I would be coming down and I would hit some little hill and I would sail. And then I would go down farther and hit another hill. And the next thing you know, I went sailing up off of this hill and landed in a big pile in the snow. And I had no idea where I was. God only knows how far I was off of the trail. And I was pretty confused, lost in the woods. The woods right there were pretty heavy. So I dusted myself up and I started walking towards what I thought, what I'd hoped was the freeway. Well, pretty soon it started to get dark and I started to get worried. I don't think I was anywhere near the freeway. And pretty soon it was dark and now I was worried and I kept trudging through the snow. And suddenly I saw a little light far off in the distance. And so I made for that little light and it took me about an hour to get there. When I got there, I came upon this little cabin deep in the woods and it had like a lantern in the window. There was a light, strong light coming through the window. So I walked up to the door and I banged on the door and a little old man came to the door. I told him my story, you know, I fell down the mountain, those darn kids, and I'm lost. I don't know where I am. I'm freezing cold. By the way, I'm starving. Well, he invited me in and he sat me down at this table and I started talking and I kept telling him about my little story in more detail. And he fixed me this little meal. He fixed this great coffee and he made me this trout and these little like red potatoes. They were wonderful. I mean, the trout was unbelievably exceptional, like nothing I'd never had before. And so after I finished the meal, I said, hey, that was really good. I said, you know, that trout was really good. And he said, yeah, that's my mine fish. I didn't really think anything of it. And so we talked for another hour or so, and he showed me this little cot, and I went to sleep, and I slept like a baby. Well, the next morning, I woke up to coffee brewing on the little stove, and I could smell cooking smells coming from the stove, and I got up and I sat down at the table, and again, he was cooking fried trout, bacon, little red potatoes, strong coffee. So we had breakfast. When we were done, I mean, I was done. That was a great meal. But I again told him, I said, man, you are a great cook, but I got to tell you, that fish is phenomenal. He kind of smiled at me. He goes, yeah, you know, he says, that's my mine fish. He says, that's how I make, you know, some extra income. He says, that's how I make some pretty good money. He says, I just do it around this time of the year. And I said, I'm not sure I know what mine fish is. I said, this looks like a trout to me. And he says, it is a trout, but it's mine fish. He said, I mine them. He says, I'm an old gold miner, and in the winter, I mine them out of a frozen lake. He said, it's right here on the property. Well, I didn't believe him. I wasn't going to say, hey, I don't believe you, but I'm pretty sure he could tell. He said, come on, I'll show you. He said, I'll take you to the mine. So we got up, we left the cabin, and we walked probably about 300 yards, and we came down this little tiny hill, and there was a small lake, and it was covered with the snow from the night before. And he walked out onto the lake, and he walked out maybe like 100 feet, and he bent down and he brushed all the snow away. And there was this little piece of plywood with like this leather thing on it. He opened it up. It was like some sort of latch. Anyways, when he took off this piece of plywood, you could see these stairs that were actually carved right into the ice, and they went straight down. And he said, I got a lantern down there. He said, just follow me. And he actually walked up and started walking down the treads on those stairs, and he disappeared. And I thought, what the heck? So I followed him down those stairs. Now it was dark down there. When I got to the bottom, I could hear him kind of fooling around somewhere. So I just kept walking towards the sound. Then I heard him strike a match, and then suddenly the room lit up, and it was magnificent. That lantern was just so bright, and the light shot out, and it shone right into the ice, that green bluish ice. Now, we were in a chamber that was about 20 by 25. And he walked over to this wall, and he took the lantern with him, and I followed him, and he stood in front of this wall, and that light shone deeply into the lake, and it just shimmered way down into there, and the colors were just phenomenal. And all through the water, through this green blue ice, were these trout frozen all through the ice. I just stood there in amazement. He reached down, he pulled out a chisel and a hammer from this bag, and he started chipping away. And then he pulled out this little block of ice, and sure enough, it had a trout in it. And he said, you know, I'm an old man, I can't mine gold anymore, but I can sure as heck mine these trout. And he said, you know, I sell them for a pretty fine price to those restaurants in Lake Tahoe. And he handed it to me. He said, you know, I did feed you, you could give me a hand. And so he and I set to work, and we started mining those fish together. Well, we got quite a bundle together between the two of us, and we hauled him out to his cabin, and he put him in a freezer, and then he gave me some, and we got in his car, and we started driving back towards the highway. And as we were driving, he said, you know, I am pretty old. He said, I'm looking for a partner for my fish mine. He said, I only need like $5,000. I just happen to have my checkbook. I whipped it out, I gave him that $5,000, and I said, I'll be back next weekend. He dropped me off at the freeway, and I watched him as he drove that truck deep back into the mountains. And that was the last time that I saw him. But every winter, after the first snow, I go up to see if I can find my lost fish mine.
Yay! Bravo!
That was one of the best shaggy fish stories I've ever heard.
Oh, it's a true story.
Well, of course
still
it
have
is. You
some of
couldn't
those
make
fish in
something
the
like
freezer.
that up. David, that was a great story. I'm glad you're able to share that with us.
That was my pleasure.
Well, next up is one of our Southern California tellers. And Ron Chick is one of the busiest storytellers you've ever seen because he is involved in all of the storytelling groups for many miles around and some that are farther than that because he's been actively involved with storytelling as far away as Texas. And he's also a proud grandfather, and he's been introducing his grandson to storytelling at our Zoom meetings. And his grandson sits on his lap and participates by watching and listening to the storytelling and wearing interesting hats, but that's another part of the story. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you the storyteller, Ron Chick.
Well, several years ago, I thought I tell stories about all the major holidays except Thanksgiving. And I tried to find Thanksgiving stories. And there just aren't very many of them that aren't cooking disaster tales. But Karen Chase said, well, you can tell stories about people who are grateful or generous. And she gave me this story. There was an old man named Wally Dodd, who was called Wally Dodd Gunje, or Wally the Bald. He made his living outside the big town, where he would go out into the wadi every day and cut grass. And he knew every stone of the great wadi. And he'd bring his grass in bundles back and sell it in the town for a few pennies per bundle. With those few pennies per bundle, he would buy his simple foods, occasionally a new tunic or a pair of shoes. But when he had coins left over, where his pillow was a hole. And he would drop the coins down into a jar that was there, as his father and his grandfather had done before him, against the day he could no longer work, if that day ever came. And he noticed one year that there was a different sound as the coins dropped. And one night he went to put in 3 pennies and realized there was no room. He had reached the top of the jar. And so the next day, instead of going out and cutting grass, he dug up his floor and pulled out what turned out to be a very large jar. He poured out of it pennies after pennies after pennies after pennies. It must have been his great-great-grandfather. Who knows how long it had been good tradition in that family. He poured out this enormous number of coins and thought, what can I do with this wealth? I am an old man, not long for this world. I could use a new blanket and maybe a new set of clothes, but other than that, I need nothing except the life that I have. So he took wrapped it all up in a big sack, took it into town, and bought the few things he thought he could use, and then he went to a jeweler who was a friend and often bought grass from him. He said, I cannot carry these coins around. Do you have anything that might make a good trade, a good purchase for these? And they counted out the coins, and the jeweler said, many years ago, I got a beautiful breast bracelet. It is far too fine for anyone that has been near here. Why don't you trade me your coins for it? And he looked at this beautiful thing and thought, oh, it is quite lovely. And he went home with his purchases and his bracelet. But as he sat down to a simple meal that night, he thought, this is far too fine a thing for an old man like me. I wonder what I should do with it. And what would happen if people got word that I had a very valuable bracelet here? Would I have to carry it with me when I went to the wadi? Would someone try to rob me? And so he went to a friend's house who was a great merchant and traveled throughout the Middle East. And he said to the merchant, you've been to many of the great houses. Do you know of a princess who would be deserving of this fine bracelet? The merchant thought for a moment and said, yes, there is one princess, the princess of Kyrgyzstan, that is beautiful and kind and generous, and that would look fine on her wrist. Well, he said, please take this with you on your journeys and present it to her. And if she asks who it was, just say, it was a man who admired her from afar. And so time went on. In due course, the merchant arrived in that city. He begged an audience with the princess and gave her the bracelet. And she looked at this bracelet that was as fine as any as she had ever seen in her royal life. And she said, "Come back tomorrow and I'll have an answer for you." She went to her father and said, "Look at this beautiful bracelet. I do not know who it's from. It's just some admirer from afar." Hey, the king said, "We can't have that go unanswered. Hey, let's make a fine gift to send back for this admirer of yours." And so, when the merchant returned the next day, there in the courtyard were 3 camels laden with beautiful cloths and silks. And the princess said, "Take these back to my admirer and thank him." Well, it was no trouble to take them along on his journeys. The camels were well trained, and the merchant went on about his business. And then, as he approached their native area, he began to turn off toward Wally's home. And Wally saw the dust rising from a few horses and burros and other things, and thought, "Oh, if I cut a bunch of grass right now, I can sell it as they come by, and I won't have to haul anything into the village tonight." And so he rushed into the wadi and cut as fast as he could, and came back out to his house to find the caravan had stopped there. And his old friend, the merchant, saying, "Wally, your gift was well received. They have sent back these 3 camels with their burdens as a gift to you." "What am I, an old man, to do with such magnificent cloths and camels? They would be too much work for me. Do you know of a prince who might make use of these fine things?" Of course, the handsome young prince of Niqabad is as fine a man and as fair a man as has ever been born. And he will have good use for these cloths for the fine horses that he raises. Well, keep 1 camel for yourself and take the rest of it to the prince. And so he did. It took him some time to get to that part of the world, but he presented the camels and the cloths to the prince. And the prince thought, "Who are these from?" "Just someone who has admired you from afar," said the merchant. The prince thought, "This is very strange, but I can't leave this unanswered." And so he went to his stables and he got 20 of his finest horses. And he ordered them all outfitted in fine trappings. And he loaded 2 of them with chests of silver and said, "Take these back to my admirer with thanks." Well, by now the merchant was quite confused and not at all sure where all of these problems and things were going to go. But he headed toward home, and went out to Wally's house. Wally was watching them come. He thought it might be his merchant friend. He gathered some grass, thinking that they'll be his horses and they might want some food. But when they approached and he saw all these magnificent horses, he thought, "What am I to do with these things? I could not possibly care for them. And as for silver, I had too many pennies for the life as I have. I don't know what to do with all of this." And so he said, "Could you take these things back to Kirsten, and present them to the queen?" The merchant said, I suppose I could. "Well, be sure to keep 1 of the chests of silver for yourself and maybe a horse or 2. And so, well compensated and having to hire a couple of guards to go along with this silver, the merchant agreed, but thought, this is getting out of hand. He went as soon as he could back to that part of the world. He came to the princess's palace. He offered her the gifts. The princess went to his father and said, "What shall we do? This is great wealth and beautiful animals. I think this must be an extremely wealthy prince who has fallen in love with you from afar, my dear. we cannot answer. We cannot just send back an answer. We must go and meet this person and bring with us things to thank him. And so the merchant was detained for some days as a great caravan was prepared for the king and his daughter and their royal entourage. And their gifts were elephants and camels and horses and jewels and magnificent wealth. And they pressed the merchant to tell them about the prince or the person who had given the gifts. Now, the merchant was usually a fairly honest man, but he couldn't say he's a humble old man who just cuts grass for a living. And so he described him in such glowing terms that Wally would never have recognized himself. As they made the several days journey toward their home, he thought, this is awful. The king and the princess may be angry. I may lose my life. Generous, kind Wally may lose his life. I don't know what to do. And so when they were just one day's journey away, he went to the king and said, I don't think it's fair to drop in on Wally without preparing him for your visit. May I go on ahead? You stay here a day. And they agreed that was fair. And he made the straight way to Wally's house and told them about the problem that they had. Wally wrung his hand and said, what am I to do? What am I to do? I have put you in danger. I have put myself in danger. All I wanted to do was to be kind and generous. I do not know, my friend, but they will be here tomorrow, no matter what you decide to do. And he went back to his own house, thinking that tomorrow might be his last day. Wally sat in his humble house and thought, what can I do? They cannot come to this tiny place and see me as I am. They cannot harm my friend. I think the only thing I can do is to kill myself this night, and they'll find an empty home and go on about their business. And so he climbed up along the wadi walls and the cliffs above to a place where the stones were very sharp below. And he knelt down, he looked over the edge and he saw the stones wrong before, and he backed up a couple of feet as if he were going to run and jump, but he just couldn't do it. And so he fell to the ground and began to cry. After a few moments, he realized it was no longer pitch black. It was way too late for it to be sunrise, middle of the night. He got up, and there behind him were two beings made of light, Peri from paradise, angels of the Lord. They said, why are you crying, old man? And Wally told him his problems. And they said, you have been nothing but kind and generous your whole life. Come with us. We have solutions for you. And they walked back toward Wally's humble hut. But there was a magnificent palace with servants. They led him inside and said, put on some of these fine clothing and await the morning. Wally looked around and thought, I am an old man, but I suppose I shall have to meet them in the way they're accustomed to. I don't want my friend to get in trouble, and perhaps I can find a way out of this in the morning. Morning came, the caravan came with their beautiful banners all strung out, and all of their fine gifts with them. And Wally greeted them in his fine clothes and brought them inside. And the king said, you have clearly fallen in love, Wally, with my daughter from afar. She is young and beautiful. Are you looking for her as a bride? Me, an old man with one foot on the ground, marry a beautiful princess such as this, and all this magnificent wealth? I have little need of more wealth. But I know of someone who might make a suitable husband for her. And he told them about the generous, kind prince who lived in Nicaragua. And so he was sent for. And the king of Nicaragua and the prince arrived with magnificent gifts and a whole series of people. And as always happens in stories like this, the two young people fell in love and established their own kingdom nearby. As for Wally Dodd, the simple merchant, the simple grass cutter, his house shrunk back to something normal, but he lived there in peace and honor for the rest of his days. The tale of Wally Dodd and Jay.
All right. Thank you for always bringing stories that I've never heard before. I appreciate that, and the variety of stories that you tell. And I'm glad you found something that can fit your Thanksgiving idea and
I
concept.
still have never found a second story that fits.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, well, please welcome our next storyteller from the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. She is a new teller for us and for the Sacramento group. And I had the good fortune of sharing a story where she was sharing a story for a group called Tellabration Arts, which is a performing arts and educational company that's been in Sacramento for many, many years and works mostly in underserved communities, providing opportunities for performers. And they have amazing plays. And Laura happened to be there on they started a few years ago a storytelling event once a year. And I heard her tell this story and I went, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And she came to our local chapter and told a story in person. Now, she's a performer in person, so I'm sure this Zoom is going to be interesting for her. But she describes herself as a garrote, and am I saying it correctly? Garrote? You're muted. She said griot by bloodline and lineage. And she's most recently expanded in her response to the call to tell her stories. She's beyond song and spoken word. And I think you're going to get to hear her voice today. I'm not positive, but she is just an amazing singer. And so please welcome Laura, a new teller to the world of storytelling.
Thank you. Mm, 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 Sister, you've been on my mind. Sister, we're two of a kind. So, sister, I'm keeping my eye on you. I bet you think I don't know nothing but singing the blues. Oh, sister, have I got news for you? I'm something. I hope you think that you're something too. Oh, Scrufflin', I've been up that lonesome road and I've seen a lot of suns going down. Oh, but trust me, no low life's gonna run me around. So let me tell you something, sister, remember your name. No, Twister, gonna steal your stuff away, my sister. We sure ain't got a whole lot of time. So shake your shimmy, sister. 'Cause sugar, I sure is feeling fine. If you are at all aware of the Yoruba people from West Africa, You might have heard tell of Oya. Oya? Oya? Oh, whew. Okay. Oya, she is, has been, and is yet becoming. Like Earth's winds, she is nothing to play with. Summoning change, transitionings laid out before us through forests and plains. Okay, and she topples things, but that brings life again. Okay, some have been found lost amidst rooftops and tree trunks tossed, but new lives often cost, old lives wroth with rot. I once was, but she, oh yeah, she lifted thens and laid them down. She opened up new grounds, fresh scented, risen from old deaths, witnessed and unseen. She is uprooting. She is the change we dare to dream fearfully. A force, fierce. Her color of wine, her number of 9, her course rears, shakings and strikings, and the laying lows of that these newnesses come. So celebrate if you dare honor Oya. Oya? Oya. Oya. Excuse me. Oya? I give thanks for the things you reveal. As a result, I reseal fear far from me. For you are revered. And I think of you every single time I sip anew. I'm humbled to my already aching knees. And finally, mine eyes see beyond what so many of us deem mere tragedy. Oya! Hekwa! Oya! My yesterdays, they sing high praise, for without your machete, sword, oh, today, sweet, sweet today might never have shown her face. Oh yeah, you are, always have been, and are yet becoming. And I give thanks. Ashe. Amen. Amen. Mm. 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 Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that really, really nice telling. I love the way you blended the music and the traditions and just the visual arts and the sound of your voice together. And I hope you keep working on this and doing this kind of thing more. And I hope the technology part didn't scare you too much. So We're about to welcome our fourth teller from the Inland Valley Storytellers. And Angela Lloyd has been doing this for quite some time. You may have encountered her involving things like the LA Music Center or the National Storytelling Network, where she was given the Circle of Excellence Oracle Award 9 years ago. She's currently the chair of the Youth Educators and Storytellers subgroup of the National Storytelling Network. And she's been involved with different aspects of storytelling, but the thing that I found most interesting is that she's been teaching children about storytelling for many years as part of what she does. And she's managed to convert that to an online format, so she no longer has to commute from way out into the desert into Los Angeles to teach them, but she's still doing that. And I promised not to talk about her days on the Barbary Coast, so we're going to start now. Ladies and gentlemen, Angela Lloyd.
I can't wait to hear about the Barbary Coast. Hi, everybody. What a lovely group of stories we've heard. The instrument I'm holding in my arms is called an auto harp. And if you look at it like this, it could be a piano that's being moved out of an apartment that somebody shrunk small so you could hold it in your arms like a baby. Like a baby. Just gonna play a little melody and move into a story. I was at my school on Friday. That's 2 days ago. And they're getting ready for Grand Friends Day next Tuesday. And we often put up world maps in the classroom and ask the grandparents and grandfriends to show us where their families hailed from. And so on Friday, when I was with the 4th and 5th graders, I shared a song written by a local Los Angeles-based singer, songfighter. Everybody say that word, songfighter, Ross Altman. And he wrote this melody. It's called Dance the Moon. Well, people say there's a land of plenty far across the golden sea, where you and I can live in freedom. There we'll raise our family. We'll dance the moon across the sky. There our children will be born. Say farewell, for we are leaving early in the morning. Early in the morning. That chorus is going to come around again, so I'll line it out. You can stay muted and you can join in, okay? We'll be digging for gold, not Brady's potatoes. If we fail, there's work at hand. Building a railroad won't be easy, but it's better than starving on the land. We'll dance the moon across the sky. There our children will be born. There our children will be born. Say farewell, for we are leaving. Say farewell, for we are leaving. Early in the morning, early in the morn. Early in the morning, early in the morning. Well, where can a Jew from a Russian shtetl live where they won't destroy his home? In all of this world, this land, I've not heard of one pogrom. We'll dance the moon across the sky. There our children will be born. There our children will be born. Say farewell, for we're leaving. Say farewell, for we are leaving. Early in the morning, early in the morning, early in the morning. Well, there is a lady in the harbor. There is a lady in the harbor, carries a flame of liberty. In all of this world, there's no one like her. That is why you and me will dance the moon across the sky. There our children will be born. Say farewell, for we are leaving early in the morning. Early in the morning. Well, all of these dreams and so many others came true only yesterday. Can you and I, their children's children, now turn others away when they say, we'll dance the moon across the sky. We'll walk the desert sands tonight. Say farewell, for we are leaving early in the morning. Early in the morning. We'll dance the moon across the land. There our children will be born. Say farewell, for we are leaving early in the morning. Early in the morning. One time at my school, Walden School, we had a parent who, when she left Vietnam, had been calling one number for weeks. And finally, she had a call back. And then the person came to visit her and said, can you bring one bag? Can you be ready in 2 hours? And she said, can I bring 12 people with me? And the man said, 12? She said, yes, my family and our neighbors. He said, 12? She said, 12. He went round the corner, came back. He said, 12, only 12. You have 2 hours. You can bring a bag this big. And that's what she packed, a small knapsack. And she told her neighbors, and they packed a small knapsack. And I asked if she'd come and tell the 4th and 5th graders at our school about that. And if she could show us, either in drawings or some representation, what she put in her bag. And she came. It was several weeks later. And one of the stories she told was that she had neighbors, a young girl who had her journal, her diary. She was about 15, and it was thick. It was big. It was like this thick. She liked to draw, and she pushed that into the bag. And then an auntie of hers, an older woman, said to her, no, you have to put money in. Put this money in your bag. We need this money. And so she reluctantly took the journal out of her bag and pushed in all this money. And they went to an airplane hangar there near in Vietnam. I don't remember the town. And they sat inside a hangar for 2 days with all these people and their one bag, men, women, children. And then they flew in the night. And they got off the plane, and I don't remember where they got off the plane, but they got off the plane, and again, they were in a hangar for 2 days waiting. And then they flew to Hawaii. And again, they were waiting, and then they finally came to San Diego. She said they arrived in San Diego around 3 a.m. And she said, when they came down the stairs of the airplane, there were men and women there with smiles on their faces. And they were completely welcomed. They were taken to a large place. I don't know if it was a hangar or some other place. And they had fresh, hot coffee and sandwiches and cake. And she just couldn't believe it, that somewhere in this world you could have this journey the way she did and then be welcomed so lovingly and thoughtfully into this country. She lived here with her parents and studied, went to school, became a dentist, and both of her boys were at our school. And while she told that story in that 4th and 5th grade classroom, I went round the back of the children to the teachers. There were 2 teachers sitting in the back of the room. And I kind of put them on the spot, but just them, not in front of the children, which is not unusual for me to do. But I asked the teachers, I said, can we send the children home today with an assignment that they take 1 hour tonight as their homework. They have 1 hour to pack a small bag as if they were leaving home, and they bring that to school tomorrow. And the teachers said, yes, they're whispering. And then they said, when we finally gave the instruction to the children, they had already figured out, don't bring your parents' prized wedding photograph in a glass frame with silver. You could draw a picture to show your parents' wedding picture. Anything that's really valuable, don't bring that to school. Just make a picture of it for your bag. And so the children did that homework. And the next day we paired them up. And this was a 4 or 5 class. So we paired the 4th graders with the 5th graders. And they sat together and they showed what they brought. And one of the stories that the mama who had shared her travel story, her immigration story to America, she shared with us that at one of the stops on their way to the United States, someone saw the money this young girl had been, talked into pushing into her bag to bring from Vietnam. And they said, that money is worthless. You could use it to draw on. It has no value. And she just burst into tears because she left behind her story, left behind her diary. So the children sat together, and later they made drawings for the mama. They used index cards, and they drew pictures, and they wrote little lists in wonky pencil paper, pencil handwriting, telling her what they packed, what they would pack if they left home. And it was really interesting to see, like some kids just filled their bags with food. Some kids brought their, 6 favorite t-shirts. Many brought their stuffies, their stuffed animals. Some brought blankets, some brought mementos, marbles, Legos, toys. But it was such a valuable exchange for these children because they learned so much about each other and about what they valued on that day. We knew it was probably going to change as they grow. And it was one of those wonderful moments that those of you who teach have when you see an exchange between two people. And as I used to always put on the bookmarks I would have at the door after the assembly for the music center, I would write on it, the shortest distance between two people is a story. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Angela, again. And a deeply felt, touching story. And it's exactly the kind of thing that should be happening often in our educational system. Real experience, real relationships with real people, and adults going in and sharing their experience. We need to have a lot more of that. People coming into school systems. So thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. Okay, well, our last storyteller for this evening comes to us from the frigid snows of the northern United States, the Dakotas. He moved here in 1999, 2019. And he found out about the Sacramento Storytellers Guild and storytelling events, and decided that he wanted to get involved with this. So he's joined our organization, and he's just been nominated to get on the board. So that's very exciting. So he's had a chance to share some stories with us through the Storytelling Association of California, and at Linda's fantastic potluck that she put on for about 15 of us storyteller listener types. And so I am very excited to have our program ended by John Petrick.
Thank you, Ed. My wife is recording me so our son can see it, and our grandkids. So I'm gesturing over here to try to get all that straightened out. So
nice.
Sorry about that. Okay, this is a story I wrote about my father. Honor thy father. Well, that Old Testament commandment is probably pretty easy to follow if you've got one of those dads that teach you how to throw the baseball and take you fishing and help you build a camp in your backyard. But what if your father is the most evil, the most cruel, the most hated, the most feared man in the world. Well, that's me. My dad is Darth Vader. Well, we all know that Darth Vader wasn't always evil. Back before he went over to the dark side, he was a trusted and honored Jedi Knight. Some even said he was the chosen one. And before he married into the Jedi royalty and had Princess Leia and Luke, he had a little affair with a barmaid who happened to be my mother. Well, until recently, I didn't know anything about my father, the good side or the evil side. You see, to hide the scandal of this illegitimate child, the Jedi hid my mother and I in the most remote place they could think of, on a planet called Earth, on a farm in a place called South Dakota. And my mother got a job as a housekeeper for this handsome young farmer named Albert. And I grew up on that farm. Well, I found out later that the Jedi continued to monitor me until I was 9 or 10 years old. But when I didn't show any talent for Jedi skills like lightsaber fighting or driving jets through canyons and under bridges or leading the forces of good against evil, well, I kind of got forgotten. And my mom, she eventually married Albert and they had a bunch of kids of their own. And Albert was probably a pretty good dad. He raised me like I was his own son. He was kind of a crusty old fart, so we often butted heads, but for the most part, he kept his best for his kids in the forefront. And of course, my real father was pretty busy during that time, raising Luke and Leia and fighting all these battles. So I can't really blame him for forgetting me. But what I can understand is how he became the greatest traitor in the history of the universe when he went over from a Jedi Knight to the dark side of the evil empire. But I guess that probably kept him busy too. And so I was just raised as American farm kid, didn't know anything about Vader or Skywalker or the existential battle between good and evil. Why, in our little town, good was our high school basketball team and evil was our dreaded rivals down the road, the Wakanda Warriors. Well, Albert did his best, but just like I had no talent for Jedi skills, I had no talent for farming either. Why, raising crops and fixing machinery, they were just a mystery to me. So, like a lot of people without any practical skills, I became a lawyer. And I gotta say, I was a pretty darn good lawyer. I grew my practice and reputation, gradually getting bigger and more complicated cases and bigger and better clients. And I was doing really well. I got married and had a few kids of my own, and I was set. And then one day I got a phone call from some orphans from the planet Alderaan. While these kids had been on a field trip, their parents, their families, their homes, their entire planet had been destroyed by the evil empire. And they were looking for a lawyer to sue the evil empire to get justice. But this was going to be the biggest case of my career, the capstone of my career. The press all over the universe covered this. Well, after the usual several years of legal maneuvering, the case finally got to trial. And Darth Vader was the key witness. If I could get Darth Vader to concede, we would win the case. On about the 10th day of the trial, Darth Vader took the stand, and his attorney walked him through some pat questions, and he gave some pat answers about how he had no responsibility. And then it was my turn. And courtroom security had taken away all of his weapons and all of his shields. So it was just him against me, mano a mano. And he was the toughest and the most ferocious witness I've ever seen. Every question, every answer was a battle. But like any good cross-examination, I got him to admit a few minor points. And then I built on that to get him to admit a few other things. And you build until it was time to approach the witness with the ultimate question. Mr. Vader, you have admitted that you controlled all the activities of the evil empire. You have admitted that the evil empire had the capacity and the motivation to destroy the planet Alderaan. You have admitted, and other people have testified, that the starships of the evil empire were surrounding the planet and no other forces could penetrate that airspace. So tell me, Mr. Vader, how could anyone else but the evil empire be responsible for the destruction of the planet Alderaan? Why, you little, he slammed down his helmet. The whole courtroom gasped. Darth Vader looked just like me. The same round, bald head, the same crooked teeth. Why, even the moles on the side of the face. Whoops, wrong side. Flabbergasted, I said, "You look just like me." He sat down and he stared at me with a stare that penetrated my very bones. "Are you from South Dakota?" Surprised, I said, "Yes." "Then I think I am your father." He sobbed. I sobbed. We hugged and sobbed together. The other lawyer jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. I move for a mistrial." The judge said, "Granted." And so I lost the case. I destroyed my reputation and my career. But I found my father.
Thank you, John. I've never quite heard a story mixing personal and Star Wars in that fashion. Well, I believe we've come to the end of our afternoon of storytelling, haven't we?
Yes, we have. Well, thank you everyone for attending this joint Tellabration. It's been a joy of ours and a plan of the Storytelling Association of California to connect Southern California storytelling groups and Northern California storytelling groups. And there were two other pairings that happened throughout California here earlier this month. And we will continue doing this in the future. And we appreciate everyone who attended today. And we would, now we're going to open it up to any of our tellers first. Anything they would like to share with us about events they've got coming up. And then we are opening it up to the audience. So all the people here, please go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you have something you want to say, just raise your hand in the chat there and we will get to you.
I would like to say this is our third time to do a joint Tellabration, and I think it's such a wonderful idea that SAC had to do these kind of events. It's been a real joy for us all three times, and I hope we continue doing this.
That is we are planning to do that, definitely. Anybody else want to share something or share an event that they've got coming up?
Ed, why don't you tell about your actual meetings up there with your group?
Okay, so the Sacramento Storytellers Guild meets the third Saturday of every month. We actually met yesterday, and we have joined forces with the Sacramento Poetry Center, and we use the center to put on we've done in-person events for about 6 months now. Our tech person, who's the tech for this event, and Andrew Loffer, who's a great storyteller and an amazing technical person, worked out all the technology so we could do an in-person as well as a Zoom event. And Andrew is available, and he's also done a workshop for the Storytelling Association of California on creating hybrid events. So using technology, so as we move forward and people feel comfortable coming back in person, that we can do in-person events and also do them on Zoom. And it's basically fairly simple. Of course, you got to have some technical skill, and Andrew might be able to tell you a little bit about that, but he put on a great workshop that the Storytelling Association of California did just about 3 weeks ago or so, or a month maybe. And an event that we meet from 2 to 3:30 in the afternoon, and we invite, we usually have 5 storytellers and 2 poets, and everyone has up to 10 minutes. And so if any of you are interested in getting involved with us, we would encourage that. And the resource is the Storytelling Association of California. And all of you, this event will be recorded on the Storytelling Association of California website on YouTube. So you can go there and you can see this whole show. And it's posted for a month or so you can check it out. And
regarding the Sacramento Storytellers Guild, we are going to put on the first ever Sacramento Valley Storytelling Festival in May of 2023, May 20th. This is it'll be a very modest event, just a single day event. We hope to make it a 2-day event the next year and maybe a 3-day event the year after that. We'll be probably looking for partners and so on after that. So we would like to make it a premier event one year.
Right. And at this point, we have 3 tellers that are doing workshops and an evening performance. And those people are Willie Claflin, and then Claire Hennessy and Corey Rosen from the Sacramento area. Many of you, I'm sure, know them. They're all 3 are just amazing storytellers. They'll be doing each a workshop, and they'll be doing a performance. We will have regional tellers, and it's kind of starts at 1 and then dinner break, and then we have the evening concert with the 3 tellers from 7 to 9